There is not a single piece of chrome on this vehicle. Not one. Everything you are looking at is matte black, gloss black, or dark-tinted glass, and somehow it still manages to communicate more presence than anything I have reviewed in months. That amber light strip running the full length of the body is doing something genuinely clever, and I want to show you exactly what that is. Before we get into it, this is an AI-generated concept design. It does not exist in any factory, no one is building it, no one is selling it. It is pure imagination, and that is exactly why it is worth analyzing, because when you remove real-world constraints, you see what design could become. Here is what we are doing today. First, we are going to walk the exterior, front face, side profile, that 6-wheel stance. Then we are getting into what I think is happening inside this thing, based entirely on what the exterior is telling us. Then powertrain logic. And finally, the verdict, including one specific detail at the rear of this concept I have genuinely not seen handled this way before. I'm saving that for the end. Let's go. The first thing that hits you from the front is the language this face is speaking, and it is not speaking motorhome, it is speaking hypercar. The headlight clusters sit low and wide, framed in amber DRL strips that cut across the front fascia in sharp, angular lines. There is no softness here, no curve trying to make this thing look friendly. This face is aggressive by intent, and the designer knew exactly what they were doing. That grille section, the dark mesh panel sitting between the lower amber strips, is proportioned more like a performance SUV than a coach-class vehicle, and that matters, because when you're looking at something this size, the front face is the only part of the vehicle most people will ever see first. If the front face does not command respect, nothing else gets the chance to. This one commands it immediately. You'll also notice the windshield angle. It's raked back further than a typical motorhome, significantly further. That's not just aesthetic. A more aggressive windshield rake reduces frontal drag, and on a vehicle this size, drag is the enemy of range. The designer was solving a real problem, even in a fictional brief. Step around to the side, and the first word that comes to mind is resolved. This profile is resolved. The roofline runs dead flat from front to rear, not a hint of a taper, not a slight slope. That flat roofline is a deliberate signal about interior ceiling height, and I want to come back to that when we get inside. The amber light strip that you saw on the front face continues here, and this is the detail that separates a good concept render from a great one. That strip runs the full horizontal length of the vehicle at consistent height, and then at the rear corners, it drops vertically down the body in 2 clean pillar lines. That single graphic element is doing 3 things at once. It makes the vehicle look longer, it makes it look lower, and it creates a visual identity you'd recognize from 300 meters away. Glass-to-body ratio on this side profile is conservative by luxury motorhome standards, and I think that is a considered choice. Large glass areas compromise thermal management, privacy, and structural rigidity. The side windows here are portrait format, taller than they are wide, which maximizes light ingress while keeping the structural sill sections strong. That's sound engineering thinking embedded in what looks like a purely aesthetic decision. The body sides on this concept are virtually flush. No protruding door handles, no external grab rails, no wing mirrors in the traditional sense. The concept implies camera-based side monitoring, which is already standard on high-end European coach builds. Flush body surfaces reduce turbulent airflow across the sides of the vehicle, which at motorhome speeds, typically 60 to 80 miles per hour on highways, has a meaningful effect on drag and, by extension, range. The designer was solving a real problem, even in a fictional brief. The finish here is doing something unusual. The primary body panels appear to be a deep gloss black, not matte, not satin, full gloss. but light is behaving ununiformly across the surface, which tells me the panels have subtle convex shaping in them, catching light differently across the body length. That's how you make a black vehicle look like it has depth rather than just darkness. A flat black panel reflects light uniformly and reads as cheap. A subtly shaped black panel changes as you move around it. This concept has the latter. 6 wheels. Let me say that clearly. This is a 6-wheel configuration with a twin rear axle carrying what appear to be 22 to 24-inch rims in a multi-spoke dark finish. The rear dual axle setup is not unusual on full-size motorhomes. It's actually the sensible choice for load distribution on a chassis carrying this kind of living space. But the rim choice here lifts it. Those spokes are not the utilitarian steel rims you'd expect. They're clearly performance-styled, and they fill the arch properly. The stance is planted, wide, purposeful. One more thing before we head inside, and I genuinely want you to notice this before I explain it. Look at how the rear of this vehicle is finished. There's something happening at those rear corners that I haven't seen on any other concept in this category. I'll break it down fully when we get there, but keep it in your mind. Now, let's talk about what is almost certainly happening inside this thing. I want to be upfront about something. There are no interior renders for this concept. What I am about to do is detective work, using the exterior proportions, the roofline height, the glass placement, and the wheelbase length to reconstruct what the interior logic almost certainly is. That is actually more interesting than just being handed a floor plan, because it forces you to see how every exterior decision is also an interior decision. Start with the roof. That flat roofline I mentioned, combined with those rear wheels, which appear to be 24-inch diameter, so roughly 600 millimeters radius, gives us a useful ground-to-roof reference. Based on those proportions, I estimate interior standing height somewhere between 2.1 and 2.3 meters. That is full stand-up living space throughout. You are not ducking, you are not unconsciously hunching, you are standing upright from the moment you step through the door. And that single fact changes how a space feels to live in more than almost any other dimension. The habitable length of this concept, measured from the firewall to the rear wall, appears to be in the region of 9 to 10 meters, based on the wheelbase and overhang proportions. That is serious living space. Here's how I think that volume breaks down. The cockpit zone occupies the forward section behind the cab, probably 1.5 meters of depth, giving you a functional driving position with sight lines suited to that raked windshield. The lounge zone sits immediately behind the cockpit. This is where those portrait format side windows are doing their best work, pulling afternoon light deep into the space. I would estimate this zone at 2.5 to 3 meters of length, with enough width across the full body to run opposing seating on both sides and still have a walk-through corridor. The kitchen and dining zone sits mid-vehicle, centrally located to separate the social front from the rear private. Smart placement. It means the kitchen smells, the cooking noise, and the food prep activity all stay contained to the middle third of the living space. The rear third, behind the rear axle, is almost certainly given over to the sleeping zone and bathroom. Imagine being in that lounge zone in the late afternoon. Those portrait windows are pulling in horizontal light, golden hour light across the full width of the space. The ceiling is high enough that the space does not feel like a vehicle at all. It feels like a room. A dark, dramatic, carefully considered room, lit from the sides by amber-toned natural light that happens to match the amber trim running along the exterior. That is not an accident. A concept this considered does not accidentally choose an amber exterior light strip. That warmth is meant to carry inside. Based on the mid-body width, which I estimate at 2.3 to 2.5 meters of usable interior width, the kitchen has enough run of counter space to be genuinely functional, not galley functional, residential functional. I would expect induction cooking rather than gas at this positioning level. Induction is safer in a moving vehicle, easier to clean, and consistent with the full electric powertrain logic we will discuss in a moment. Surface area here should be enough to plate a proper meal without stacking items. That matters more than it sounds when you're living in a vehicle for weeks at a time.
The sleeping zone at the rear benefits from its position over the rear axle for one important reason. It's the most structurally solid part of the vehicle. Vibration at the rear of a motorhome is lower than at the front. The bed would logically sit transversely, crossways to the direction of travel, which at this interior width gives you a bed that is wider than many hotel rooms. View access from the rear depends on how those amber vertical light strips at the corners are integrated. If they are surface mounted, there may be a rear window above them. If they are integrated into the body seam, the rear wall could be fully solid, which actually makes more sense for a sleeping zone. At this length and this interior height, a walk-in shower is not only feasible, it's expected. The gray water management logic at this price and positioning level would almost certainly include a full tank system with UV treatment capability, meaning you're not dependent on campsite hookups for water recycling. That's the detail that separates a luxury motorhome from an expensive caravan. Self-sufficiency, not just comfort. That windshield rake we discussed outside changes the driving experience in a specific way. You sit lower relative to the glass, which means your forward sightline extends further toward the horizon. On a long highway run, that reduces driver fatigue. Combined with what would almost certainly be a fully digital instrument cluster at this concept level, the cockpit here would feel less like driving a large vehicle and more like monitoring one. Autonomous highway capability is a natural extension of this logic, hands-on for the approach roads, hands-free for the motorway miles. Climate, connectivity, solar management. A concept this resolved is not running a single-zone climate system. I would expect zoned climate control, different temperatures in the cockpit, lounge, and sleeping area simultaneously. Connectivity would be satellite-based, not dependent on cellular signal. And the solar charging management, which we will cover in the powertrain section, feeds into an overall energy monitoring system that tells you in real time what you're using, what you're generating, and how far you can travel before you need to find a charge point. The interior of this concept, as the exterior promises, is not trying to be a hotel room. It's trying to be a home. There's a difference. Hotels are designed for strangers. Homes are designed for a specific person's life. This concept feels like the latter. Now, let's talk about what actually powers it.
If this were ever engineered for reality, the propulsion logic is not complicated. It is full electric, and here is exactly why that is the only answer at this positioning level. A vehicle with this exterior finish, this design intent, and this level of interior ambition is not being sold to someone who wants to stop at a diesel pump. It is being sold to someone for whom the entire value proposition is self-sufficiency and experience. Internal combustion, with its noise, vibration, maintenance cycles, and exhaust smell, works directly against that value proposition. The moment you go full electric, the driving experience becomes almost silent, and in a living space this refined, silence is not a luxury, it is a requirement. Battery capacity for a vehicle this size in a near-future production scenario would need to be substantial. Current heavy electric coaches, think the BYD C9 or the Volvo 7900 electric, operate with battery packs in the 300 to 400 kilowatt-hour range for full-day duty cycles. A motorhome does not need the same range as a transit coach, but it needs more than a passenger EV. I would estimate a realistic target of 250 to 350 kilowatt-hours for this concept, enough for 300 to 400 kilometers of highway travel before recharging, which covers a full day's comfortable driving. The solar roof, and that flat roofline is practically designed for it, would not be a primary power source. At motorhome scale, even a fully optimized solar array on that roof is generating perhaps 2 to 4 kilowatts in peak conditions. That does not move the vehicle. What it does is run the interior systems, climate, lighting, connectivity, water treatment, while you are parked. In practical terms, that means you can stay stationary for 48 to 72 hours without touching your drive battery for cabin comfort. That is the off-grid capability that makes the concept genuinely usable in remote locations. The 6-wheel dual rear axle configuration opens another interesting door. In a real-world build, the 2 rear axles could each carry independent electric motors, true all-wheel torque vectoring across 6 contact points.
What that gives you is not sports car performance. It's something more useful: controlled, low-speed traction on unpaved surfaces, stability on wet highways, and redundancy. If one motor has a problem, you still have two axles of drive. Autonomous highway mode, already standard on high-end European luxury vehicles, is a logical inclusion here. Long-haul routes, lane keeping, adaptive cruise, hands-free motorway miles. The technology to make this work at this vehicle size exists today. It just hasn't been applied to a concept this resolved. All right, let me tell you what I actually think. What this concept does genuinely well: the amber light strip. I keep coming back to it because it is the single decision that ties this entire design together. It is not decorative, it is structural to the identity of the vehicle. Remove it and you have a black box on wheels. Keep it and you have something with a visual signature. The fact that it transitions from horizontal on the body to vertical at the rear corners, that is the detail I told you to hold on to at the beginning, and that is the detail that earns this design its credibility. It's a graphic decision that also solves a safety function, making the rear corners of a very wide vehicle visible in low light. Form following function, dressed up as pure style. That is design at its best.
What seems impractical is the near-zero glass on the rear wall. I understand the reasoning: privacy, structural rigidity, clean graphic finish for those amber pillar strips. But if you are living in a vehicle and you cannot see where you have been, you lose something. Rear glass, even a narrow band of it, changes the spatial experience of the sleeping zone completely. This concept appears to have sacrificed that experience for visual impact. I think that is the wrong trade. Most impressive single detail: the consistency of restraint. Every lesser concept at this scale adds something: a chrome accent, a contrast panel, an extra vent, a decorative line that does not have a reason to be there. This concept removes. It keeps removing, and it never loses presence in the process. That kind of discipline in a design brief is rare and genuinely difficult to execute. One thing I would change: a narrow, full-width rear window band integrated into the amber light graphic rather than replacing it. Keep the amber pillars, keep the black body, add 200 millimeters of rear glazing at seated eye level. The visual identity survives, the living experience improves. That is the only edit this concept needs. What it signals about luxury mobility: the era of luxury motorhomes that look like oversized family campers is ending. What is replacing it is exactly this: vehicles that borrow design language from aerospace and performance cars, that treat darkness and restraint as premium signals rather than absence. This concept is not the future. It is a sketch of the future, and as sketches go, it is one of the most resolved I have analyzed. It is a concept, it is fictional, it is AI generated, and it is still one of the most disciplined motorhome designs I have come across.